I'm Chad Post from Open Letter Books and 3%, and I'll be moderating today this conversation about the different ways that technology or anything, there's different innovative ways that we can work with between publishers and authors, or publishers and translators, translators with translators, a whole range of very interesting and new projects and ideas that are coming out over the past X number of years. And so I'm going to quickly introduce each person on the panel. They're each going to talk about their specific project and interest, and then we'll have some general questions and open up to you guys and talk about all these different cool things. I don't want to give away too much. So directly to my right is Sarah Tomashek, who is at Amazon Crossing and has done other things. I'm gonna let you each introduce yourself more or less. Jill McCoy is from the Society of European Authors, which is responsible for a number of projects. One that she's going to talk about the most is TLHub. Another is Finnegan's List, which you should all pick up. That's the recommendations of books. And we'll be doing a panel about our presentation on May 3rd in New York, in case anyone happens to be there. And on the far end is Alexandra Buchler, who is the director of the Literature Across Frontiers program. I said that all up wrong. The director of Literature Across Frontiers, period, and has a lot of has done amazing things and interesting things, and is going to be talking about a new app that they're launching. So first off, Jill, your spotlight, all you. Okay. Tell us about TLHub.
So first, maybe a couple of very quick basic words about the European Society of Authors, which was founded in 2008. The ESA is basically works as a network of projects. TLHub is one of them. The Finnegan's List is one of them. And the third project is it's an editorial project called the Translation Watch, where we report on translation news from around the world. And our articles can be seen on a website called ifverso.com, which is the Institut Français. It's their translation platform, a database of translated books, French books translated into other languages, and also this editorial space for news around translation. But today I'm going to talk to you about TLHub, which is a tool designed to help translators and authors and people involved with translation. It's a virtual space. It's a peer network for translators and a workplace. It's a digital platform, which is online and soon to be offline, where writers and translators gather and take part together in the translation process. So why TLHub? Why did this project why did it begin? I think if I said that the 21st century is fraught with problems of cultural conflict, nationalist ideology, and identity politics more generally, perhaps some of you would agree with me. And that in a kind of messy web like this, translation has become, more than ever, a geopolitical and even geopoetical priority. So TLHub is a tool designed to awaken us to the possibility of dealing with these problems and suggests that translation could be a way to create a citizenship that's based around translation that might help us to transcend cultural conflicts. Translators are known for working on their own, in their own corner, with occasional contact with other translators and authors, and that contact usually happens via email today. But the creators of TLHub wanted to know what it would be like if there was a place online for translators to meet and work together. Because what's really lacking today, we feel, is a solid international translation community that's based not so much around making sure that translators are paid well, that they have fair contracts and visibility, which are all extremely vital concerns that the European Society of Authors cares about and causes that we defend. But what's lacking today is a community based around texts themselves, and that's actually what TLHub is about. TLHub takes the potential that we have today in the world of the Web 2.0 and puts it forward into the realm of the written word. TLHub has no source or target language, but is open to all languages. So concretely, what is it? I've talked a lot about kind of utopian ideals and why TLHub was created, but it's actually quite concrete. And to give you an idea of what it looks like, I'm going to pass around what are actually screenshots of the tool as it stands today. It's in its sort of third major programming phase. So what you see on these screenshots is not a totally accurate representation of what the tool looks like, but every day it's changing and getting better. Yeah, they're kind of not really in any particular order, but just here. Yeah, there's no real order, but there are a lot of people here, so I think we should just give them.
There's 2 pages actually.
There are actually 3. Yeah, but it's all right. Right. So concretely, the tool is made up of 4 sections. The profile section, where users fill out information on themselves and what they do. There's what we call the desktop, which is a space to categorize current and archived projects. There's a timeline, sort of like the news feed on Facebook, which lists recent activity on the tool. And then there is the sort of pièce de résistance of the tool, which is the what we call in English the scribbler, this double screened workspace where the translation is on one side and the original is on the other. The translation in progress, and the 4 main uses of the tool are one, as a place for collaborative translation, translators working together on the same text, wanting to find out how a colleague might translate a word or a sentence or a paragraph. It's also a space for authors and translators to work together. It is a place for research groups to work together, because one of the technologies that TLHub offers is is the possibility to keep track of versions of a translation and to compare versions. It's quite interesting for people working on studying the way that a translation evolves, and wanting to know what the different steps have been along the way, how words have been changed, how even punctuation has has changed throughout different versions. And then the fourth, and one of the most important uses, is for translation pedagogy. We're currently working with several master's programs in Paris. Translation master's programs where a professor, a teacher, is the administrator of a translation project on the platform and is guiding his or her students through the translation of a text. I'm not going to say too much more about the sort of technical aspects of the platform, but after this panel, if you have any questions about it, come to me. I know it might seem a little bit, if you haven't gotten a chance to look at the screenshots, it might seem a little bit difficult to visualize, but I can answer really any questions you might have. Just a couple of other quick points about it. From an ethical standpoint, it's worth mentioning that TLHub is a non-profit technology. It's independent. And we are committed to respecting copyright. That's a question I often get about the tool. So the user who submits the text, and there's a special technology to import text, and we're working on compatibility with formats such as the EPUB format and PDF and Word. The importing user remains the sole owner of the content. And like I said, for the moment, we're in the third major development stage for the tool. And for the moment, use of the tool is completely free. In the future, we are thinking about how to incorporate a subscription system where users and institutions such as universities would pay a small user's fee, which would then be reinvested in the tool for maintenance and for the development of new features. One of the interesting future developments we're working on is the incorporation of context dictionaries to help translators. So TLHub it's not an automatic translator. Of course, it's all about human translation, but we do recognize that it can be helpful for translators to have certain resources. If I'm translating a text and I want to know how a term has been translated in the past by other translators on the tool, I will be able to consult a context dictionary. Like some of you may be familiar with the Lingui website. That's the idea. I'll stop there. But again, questions about the tool, I'll stick around afterwards.
There's some questions about that later, but basically, starting from, so you represent a sort of space in which translators can work with other translators to enhance and work and collaborate and fix their translations and share them. And then we'll move on to Sarah, who's talking more from a publishing angle as Amazon Crossing's representative, and what you're doing innovatively to identify, publish, and make available and find readers for literature and translation.
Sure.
All yours.
So, like Chad said, I work with Amazon Crossing, and what Amazon Crossing is a... Excuse me. Let me scoot up here. So Amazon Crossing is the imprint of Amazon Publishing, which focuses on literature and translation exclusively. So to date, we have translated from 22 countries, 14 languages into English, and just within the last year, we began translating from English into German. So in doing that, the things that we think about are all through the lens of how do we help authors and their works cross more borders. So looking at things through that lens, the way that we think about innovation is by looking at the challenges in the industry and trying to break those apart and think about them in new ways. So I just briefly want to walk through kind of three of the main challenges that we see and how we think about approaching them. The first one that we hear quite frequently is, I just can't find a way in. So I don't know how many of you were at the panel at the end of the day yesterday, but there was a question that came up during the Q&A session asking the translators on the panel, how did you get your first project? And essentially what the answers boiled down to was that it was luck and chance. And luck and chance is a really, really hard door to get your foot into. So one of the things we're trying to think about is if translators can't find a way in, how do we create more doors for them? So a big part of that is a platform or an internet web, I'll just call it a platform, a platform that we've created to help our editors connect with translators and translators to connect with projects. So essentially what we've done is created a space where an editor can list a project where they're looking for a translator, and translators can come in and essentially audition for those works, translate a small sample snippet for us, and confirm for themselves that they're interested in the project, as well as allow us to see how they capture the tone and voice. And so that's one way that we're starting to engage with translators and think about this in the industry in terms of how do we open up more doors to help translators find projects. Another challenge we frequently hear is that there's just no money in translation. So the way we are starting to approach that is to think about how do we change that model? How do we think about it differently? So if you think about what kind of the traditional translation model is, essentially what happens is a translator is paid on a per word basis or maybe a per page basis. And that amounts to a fixed fee or an advance that you get. But often that's still too little to be really a living wage for most translators. And then you're only getting royalties of a very small percentage upon the X thousandth unit. So one thing we're trying to think about is how do we shift the balance of royalties versus fees to make it so that so that publishers' P&L statements, our profit and loss statements, where you look at what's my margin going to be on this book, doesn't look so scary with lots of fixed fees, but translators are also getting a fair royalty that can become an annuity stream that you can live off of. So that's one way that we're starting to think of how do we rebalance the payment model in translation. The third thing that kind of drives how we're thinking about innovating within this industry is a lot of people say that translation just takes too long, or it's too complicated, it's too hard, at least from a publisher's perspective. So one thing we're thinking about is how do we make that faster? How do we make that easier? And don't misunderstand me, I don't mean to in any way suggest that we are considering machine translation or replacing the human element that goes into the art of translation. But I think one of the things that we need to think about more as an industry, and Amazon Crossing as a publisher too, is how do we work smarter around you? How do we create more efficient processes and program management around taking that translation from acquisition to the time that it gets to market? And so that takes many different forms. I was talking a little bit about our platform. We've done many things on that, like click-through contracts that just make contract routing faster for getting rights or for signing up a translator for a project. It can also feed into things like what Jill was just talking about, where how do you make collaboration between translators easier and faster? How do you give people a chance to reach out for help in a more efficient and timely manner if they need it? So those are the things we think about. We don't necessarily have answers for all of them yet, but those are the ways that we're thinking about innovating within this industry.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, and now at the end, Alexandra will talk about Literature Across Frontiers and your new app, I believe, or whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah. I'll talk about a few things, not just the app, but the app is something that will be shown here later today, and I'll tell you what it's all about. Well, first of all, Literature Across Frontiers, you hesitated a bit when you were introducing me. Literature Across Frontiers, what is it? It's we call it a platform. We describe it as a platform. We also describe it as a network. We describe it as a program of activities. And if you want to find out more about what we do, you can go to our stand, which is just here opposite, and pick up one of these leaflets and brochures. So please do. Our motto has been making literature travel, and so we're trying to do that in various ways, and we're trying to do that for literatures that may not be translated that much for various reasons. They may be literatures that are written in quite large languages, but there may be also literatures written in very small minority languages. And we want to kind of achieve a situation where all these literatures will have equal access to the field of, to the arena, international arena. Of course, it's not easy, and we do this through different ways and with in cooperation with our partners. We never work alone. That's very crucial. So when you look at our website, you will see a number of activities, and they're always achieved, they're always implemented with a number of partners and individuals. And one problem we have encountered when it comes to translation of especially poetry and drama, but we have been working mainly with poetry, is that although there may be a translator between two languages like Icelandic and Estonian, or Basque and Russian, they may not be able to actually translate poetry. So we've been working on developing a method of collaborative translation, which is not really, I wouldn't call it an innovation. It's just developing the kind of the really human side of translation. And we heard, I don't think that anybody in this gathering really believes that translation can be done by machines. We know that literary translation is really has to rely on the human factor. It has to rely on human intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. And part of the human intelligence is emotional intelligence. It's part of his knowledge of where the literature comes from, of the cultural context, and how you can transpose it to a new context. When you're translating a novel, and I'm a translator myself, I had translated both novels and drama and non-fiction and poetry. You really work in very different ways. When you're translating a novel, you're alone there. It's a very solitary business, like writing. When you're translating a poem, you work in a very different way. And if you're translating a poet who is alive and kicking, and you can talk to them, it actually helps a great deal to be able to talk to the author and discuss the poem, its context, the various strategies, poetic strategies that are used in it, and then think about how you can transfer that to the new context of the new language, how you can recreate the poem. Now, to do this and to give poetry a chance to be translated, especially between quite remote languages, we have been organizing workshops which bring together poets who translate each other. Now, authors actually do make very good translators if they speak another language, and in some countries, in some cultures in particular, there is a long tradition of authors translating, and also of translation which is done really through a bridge language or through cribs, as you call it in English. And this is what we resort to, and it's a kind of controversial issue, because a lot of translators will say, how can someone who doesn't speak the language translate from it? Well, they're not doing that. Nobody's saying that this is what's happening. So what we do is we bring together a group of poets who actually work from literal versions or from already published translations through a lot of discussion. So what you get is a kind of meandering, discussion, the luxury of not having to work fast, which is something that Sarah mentioned. When you're publishing a book, when you're publishing a novel, often you have to kind of observe a schedule. When you work with poetry or with drama, you're not in a hurry. You can take your time. And what we often hear from the poets who we bring to our workshops is, and we do these workshops also with prose, but it can be only short texts like short stories, etc. But what we hear from them is this is fantastic luxury to be able to spend a week together with kindred spirits and to really explore the poem, to really explore the poetic tradition it comes from, or indeed the context that the writer may be writing against, the author may be writing against, and so on. So you have these really in-depth discussions, and then at the end of it you get a poem. And we have organized about over 60 of these workshops by now, and we would typically have about 8 to 10 people in each of them, and sometimes they come up with an incredible number of translations. The one record was 200 translations, 200 poems, or rather 200 translations, because some may be of the same poem. So this is really, I wouldn't call it innovation, but it's a way of approaching a particular problem and trying to solve it. And in terms of production, in terms of producing translations, there's also then the dissemination, how you get the translation to a reader and or to a readership, and that's where the technology comes in. So, for instance, we have been publishing for quite some time an online magazine, which is called Transcript. You can find it on our website. And which publishes translations into English, German, and French. And there's always a theme, etc. You get reviews, interviews, and so on. But it's an online-only magazine. Again, it's not something very unusual, especially not now. It was when we started. And probably many of you will know Words Without Borders, which is another similar venture based in the United States. So that's one way of actually reaching a number of readers, a much greater number than you would often reach with a book. And recently we did a project where the project consists of residences, exchange residences between two authors, between two cities, and each author explores the new city they are visiting by riding on trams, and so they're taken to parts of the city that a tourist, for example, would not normally visit. But what's interesting about this, about the project from our point of view here, is that the outcomes are actually published in the form of an iPhone app, and the app will be launched here at the London Book Fair today at 1:30 p.m. in the Mall Room, and then there will be a short demo here at 3:15. So whoever is interested in navigating through cities on their iPhone or iPad, through literature, through short stories, come and have a look. So this is another kind of example of how you can disseminate writing in translation through new technology. I think I'll stop here and pass the word to Chad again.
Okay, so now we have...
If you have any questions, you're most welcome.
Yeah, so now that we have everyone have introduced, if anyone out there has a question that you want to jump into at any point in time, that's fine. I was going to start by saying about everything here seems to be about a lot about connectivity or connections, or getting people linked up. So starting with TLHub is like allowing people to connect around a text. You guys do connecting with the translator, but also an important part that you may have sort of underemphasize is the connection that you have with readers and building an audience for literature and translation, which I have a question for too. And you have all sorts of connections because literature across frontiers connects everything overall. So practical question first for TLHub. When I saw the demonstration that you guys showed me, what I thought was really cool, so I have at the University of Rochester, we have a translation workshop that meets every Thursday night to workshop someone's sample from whatever language it might be, and we read it out loud and make marks on it, and how cool it would be to use this, where you can upload that person's translation and the original text, have people marking all on that, and then look at those screens when we read through it and talk about it. So practical question is, for people who want to do that, is this open to people being able to sign up and use TLHub now, or is it in a beta testing phase?
No, it's absolutely open now. We just can't guarantee that all of the features will work as smoothly and as perfectly as you may wish them to. Also, Chad, you mentioned comments being visible as a sort of and perhaps one question you may have is, well, could I at the end sort of save my translation version with all of the comments and do something with it, import it or print it out? And the answer is yes. One of the most important features of TLHub is the ability to archive versions and always have them. But no, to answer your question, yeah, it's TLHub is open and free and available, but the new version won't be out until I believe June. Yes.
Repeat the question
Yeah.
so they can hear.
I'm sorry?
Repeat the question just so they can hear.
So the question was, when you're working on a text, is it visible for everybody? And that's a really good question, and something I just didn't have time to mention is that there is there are different roles or sort of statuses of members of the TLHub community, and when you decide to create a project, you also assign roles to the people you want to work with. So as the creator of a project, you are the administrator. And then after you import your text and enter all of the metadata for the text, you invite your translators, or you could simply work by yourself. And as you're inviting, you're also assigning roles, and you also at that point you also make the decision of whether you want to have your project be a public project or a private project. It's public, everybody can see it. If it's private, it's only you and the members that you have invited to participate.
Go for it, Nikki.
You mentioned that terminology could be retrieved from previous versions. So it has a database, right? Which does it remember segments as well as terminology? And if so, how is it different from any other translation memory system, i.e. Those which are free and open source?
Well, TLHub actually, it is open source. It's an open source technology. I didn't mention that, but it's the code is certainly available for improvement by the community of literary-minded developers out there, of which there are a growing number. Yes. One of the technologies of TLHub is the ability to recognize segments between languages. So not only can you compare versions of a translation in the same language, but also it's possible to compare translations of a same text in several languages. And I'm not sure that translation assistance programs, translation memory systems can do that. I'm not sure if those systems can do that.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I'd like to, in response to your question, I think what I see as an immensely important thing about TLHub is the aim of building a community of literary translators. And when we have been doing our workshops for a couple of years, we realized that what is missing is the possibility for the participants to work on a text remotely before and after the workshop. And we actually started talking about developing something similar, and we spoke to some web developers, and they said, oh, this is going to be really expensive and a kind of long-term project and so on. So we were very happy when we actually heard that this was being developed by somebody else. So I think it's about the fact that it's free, and it may do some of the things that the expensive programs that translators do, but it's about building a community and encouraging collaborative translation. Yeah.
And the ongoing relationships that can develop from that, I think, are really interesting too. So switching over to Amazon, you guys are very interesting as Amazon Crossing for both finding and making available. In terms of like one way that you can talk about innovation is a crappy word in a lot of contexts for publishing, unfortunately. But one thing that's even looking at it as being innovative is making available more works to American and English readers, like increasing that process. So going from like the 3% or less or much larger, whatever that number might be, the few number of books that get published in English and made available to American and British and Australian and Indian readers, you're increasing that. So that's already sort of innovative in the sense that you're expanding this audience or expanding the publications. The second part of that seems of crucial importance is expanding the audience for translations, because one of the big problems that publishers always claim is that they can't do translations because they won't sell any books, therefore they won't make enough money, so on and so forth. So if there's any way, I know you can't give away trade secrets, but if there's things that you can talk about of like what you guys are trying to do to help increase the awareness or the readership for the books that you guys are publishing, would be really interesting, I think.
Sure. So I think there are a few things we need to consider when we think about how do we connect translations with readers. And the first thing is thinking a lot about what do readers want? Not necessarily what we as publishers want to publish or what translators want to translate. I think that's absolutely a worthy pursuit. But we also need to think about what do readers want? What do they want to read? What sort of stories really capture their imagination? And so one way we really think about that is what genres are we publishing? We use data to help guide us in terms of what types of genres, what types of subcategories are we looking for in the literature that we acquire and that we're trying to find translators for. And kind of going back to what you were saying, Chad, about just getting more translation out there. I think that's a huge part of it too, giving readers a choice. They need more selection. They need more choices within those categories of what they want to read. So I think that goes into connecting them with translation too. And then another thing to think about is how do you make it a great experience? Once they have that translated book in their hand, how do you make it so that they just keep coming back for more? And one way we think a lot about that is in the quality of translation. How do we measure that? How do we drive that going forward? One way we incorporate it into our processes right now is getting readers to read manuscripts of our books before we go to market. We get their opinions on what do you think about this? Where did you stumble in the text? What references were maybe hard? Or where was the language just it didn't quite flow for you? We take that feedback into account and we work with our translators and we work with our copy editors and developmental editors to try and produce the best text that we can and give readers a great experience when they are reading a translated book. And then I think the last thing too is thinking about how can you give people a reason for why they want to read XYZ book. And that can take several different forms. It can be a financial incentive. Maybe you run a pricing promotion around a book. Maybe it's some sort of status or reputation incentive. Think about things like reviewer status on Amazon. We have like top 500 reviewers or so forth. Or people are invited to our Vine program to review pre-publication books because they've been voted as most helpful reviewers on our site. Or you can also think about it from the idea of a purpose as in creating a cause or some sort of message behind translated literature, behind an author, behind a certain book, and using PR and marketing to drive that. So I think those are ways that we can create a larger audience for translated literature and connect readers with it.
Yeah, do you have a question?
You mentioned about getting genre fiction translated. So can we come to you as translators and pitch to you, or is it all through your...
Yeah, certainly we as acquisitions editors for Amazon Crossing are going out and scouting and acquiring books we're interested in publishing, but a lot of those actually come as recommendations from our translators too. So a great way to do that is crossing-submissions@amazon.com is one way you can submit recommendations to us, and we'll take a look at that. If it fits our list, we might pursue it.
Go on.
I'd like to, on this topic, if you're not aiming for genre fiction, but maybe high literary quality fiction, one thing that I would like to mention is that hardly any, and we had a discussion here earlier, which where a mention was made of translation funding. Now, hardly any translation fund actually funds translation when it's going to be published only electronically, and I see this as a huge problem. I think that actually e-publishing is the future of translation, and I think we should lobby the funding bodies, whether it's the European funds or the national funds or various foundations, because hardly any of them actually will give you money or will give a publisher money if the publication only happens electronically.
It's interesting. There's two different types of innovative things that are going on here that we're talking about right this moment, and there's another example I want to bring up, so I'm going to talk for 2 seconds, I promise. I'll go back to my moderating role. But one thing that you sort of alluded to is the process of acquiring books and the way that you acquire them. So the traditional way, the traditional publishing model is very sort of stiff. There's the editor that reads about the books, meets people at the book fairs like this, figures out what book they want to publish, finds a translator. That translator works in isolation. They publish the book, and that is the book that they've published because they've determined that is what their audience would like, and that is what they will make money off of, and therefore this is a good book. So there's kind of this, you can cast that into like a very elitist sort of closed wall sort of system. One of the publishers here that's moving into the U.S. now too, that's one of the most interesting and exciting publishers that exists, is And Other Stories, which uses, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with And Other Stories, such as Katie, where they use reading groups for different languages, and those groups are essentially functioning as, first of all, like editorial groups. So they have a number of German books that they want to consider possibly publishing. They have a reading group in Germany, in Berlin, that Katie and Amanda helped set up and run. They get a bunch of people who can read German, read these samples that exist of these pieces, and come together and talk about these books in person. And if the book gets a lot of like attention from this reading group and the people love it and they talk about the possibility of publishing it, then And Other Stories might sign that book on, which is genius for a number of reasons. Like, very simple thing, but very smart, is that you've sort of crowdsourced your editorial guidance. So now instead of like one guy sitting in an office like me saying like, I love this book and like, that's my own idiosyncratic taste, you've got a group of, I don't know how many people show up, 20 people, 10, 15 people that are actually talking about it and having different viewpoints and reading this book and considering it. So that gives you like a new breadth to your editorial vision. Secondly, like, you already have these people that are behind that book now. So when you go to publish it, when And Other Stories brings this out, you've got this group of people who've already read this, that have loved it, that have recommended it for publication, that were involved in that process, that can help us begin that word of mouth spreading. The second part of what I was going to say is about the ebook thing, is that there's another company who's here earlier, but Frisch & Co. is the new e-publishing company in Berlin, based in Berlin, that's doing literature and translation only as ebooks. And I think that is another way. One of the things that at their launch party last night that EJ Van Lennen mentioned was that it's at this point in our world development, it's the first time that you can really have a world community based around world literature, because you can reach everyone in every country thanks to outlets like Amazon and other digital whatever you call content providers, whatever marketplaces. You can actually be based in Berlin, have a translator based in Berlin, publish an ebook in Berlin that's read by people in America, Australia, India, all over. So it's the first time that that's a possibility. So there's some of the innovative things that are happening in the system are terrifying to like traditional publishers in a lot of ways, but are also very exciting in the way that they can allow this collaboration. The fact that before the internet and before things like Facebook, Wikipedia, and Google Documents, you couldn't really have translators working together remotely in a synchronized way that you can with TLHub. There just wasn't a possible way. And it would be very difficult. You could bring people together, but that's expensive and costly. And with things that like Literature Across Frontiers is doing of spreading that information and bringing together different points that aren't usually brought together. Like we think a lot about things translated in English, and we tend to become a little too focused on that in a lot of these types of conversations of things being published in America or in England, how those markets sort of dominate. There's also these other markets where you guys are working a lot on things translated into Arabic, or in India is a huge, huge question. There's the stuff published in English in India and all the different languages that need to be translated between each other. And a lot of the technologies that we're talking about, or a lot of the things that we're talking about structurally or mentally, are allowing for those things to happen much more commonly than they would have 10, 15 years ago. So it's sort of an exciting time. Now, as a counterpoint to that, one of the things that we talked about beforehand was the things that don't change in publishing translations. I wondered if each of you could speak to that, of things that you see as being like fundamental and unchanging. We have all this like sort of things bubbling up, possibilities, online stuff, apps, like so on and so forth, ebooks, readers, downloads, Kobo, which does something. And what stays the same, or what's still the core of this?
I think we all agree that the human element is the core of this, helping translators to get a foot in the door, get experience, get more projects, build up their skill set, and continue to refine the art form that is translation. I think I heard all of us mention that at some point, that remains really core and key to what is translation.
Yeah, I would agree here. I think that the human element and the fact that to become a translator, we often have young people coming to us and saying, how can I become a translator? And really the answer is yes, you can go and do a course. They may not do courses for all the languages, of the world in pairs, etc. But the essential thing is to do it. Like with writing, you have to, if you want to become a writer, you have to write. If you want to become a translator, you have to translate, and you have to then go to a more experienced translator and get them help you, give you feedback. And this is, I think, essential. This is what will not change, and it can be facilitated by some of these innovations, but it's really how you become a translator. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think no matter how much the world changes, words will always be around, whether they be words that we read on a screen or words that we read on a page. At the end of the day, that's sort of our medium here, and we'll always have words, thank God.
Okay, so we can open this up to questions. There's, you got it right there.
Hi, I have a question for Sarah. I am frightened by the efficiency word when it comes from a corporate, spokesperson, I guess. I was wondering if you're familiar with the work of the European Council of the Associations of Literary Translators, it's CEATL. Their report was so interesting for all of us literary translators, or translators in general, because it really exposed just how dire the economic conditions and status of the literary translator are. I mean, actually comparable to industrial cleaners in most European nations. So I'm wondering how ideas like click-through contracts and speeding up work and living from, possibly being paid by royalty rather than set amounts for some quite small, low-selling but very artistically important publications that have traditionally needed subsidising. I'm wondering how these things all come together, and you emphasise the human factor. I mean, at the moment, the human factor is feeling quite undernourished, should we say, and it's, to be frank, it's kind of frightening to think about it going into the hands of corporations which, not to mince words, are hugely involved in tax evasion and so on. So I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
So,
and sorry.
Fair question. Going to the efficiency point, I think what I was trying to express is I think there are ways for us as particularly as a publisher, to work smarter around the translation process. So not necessarily that our translators need to speed up, but that we can be thinking smarter about when are we doing our promotional text, when are we handling our cover design process, how are we moving a manuscript from the translator to the developmental editor to a copy editor to a proofreader. How do we make that flow as smooth and seamless as possible so that we can really just focus on creating great books as opposed to trying to track down the right document version, trying to track changes in a document, really trying to think about how do we work as smart as possible. So that's what I was trying to get at with efficiency.
Are you saying we're not supposed to have 3 martini lunches anymore? Because that I'm not on board with.
Those are fun.
Okay. I don't want to be more efficient in that way. I want to be more drunk in that way. Other questions? Yeah, back. She's over there.
Hi, it's another question for you. I come from a film background, and in film, nobody gets any money from royalties, ever. No, like you live off your MG, your minimum guarantee, and nobody even really bothers to chase, particularly film is a global business, the royalties that you would get from the Czech Republic, because nobody knows. Now, Amazon is famous for not revealing its sales stats, for example. So if you want us to negotiate royalties deals, I mean, I understand that you don't necessarily want to publish your figures to the rest of the industry, but do you then disclose some of that information to the people who will work for you so that they can make a fair calculation? Because this human element needs to live, no?
Yeah. No, fair enough. This question came up yesterday in a panel too. How do we make it? How do we give translators more royalties, but also not give them more risk necessarily? And so I think one thing we do is, again, going back to this whole idea of human element, how do we work with translators to give you information and give you the tools that you need to select projects that are the most commercially viable? And like I was saying at the end of kind of my intro was, we don't necessarily have the answers for everything yet, but a lot of this is about creating dialogue and working with you to understand what are the concerns, what are the challenges, what are the information that you need, and coming to agreements that work for both sides of the publishing equation, for you and for us, as well as also thinking about our authors too.
Other questions? Oh, come on. What questions from you guys? Comments? No one? Yeah, there we go.
Following on from the previous question, you mentioned projects being commercially viable. But I mean, if you've got one individual translator who looks at it and says, actually, what you're asking me to do in that time and what you're offering me is not realistic. I mean, are you expecting that maybe there'll be less experienced translators who will do it for the experience? Because I think after a certain point, if you're being a bit maybe ambitious with what you're hoping to get for the money you're prepared to pay for, then you may find that your quality starts to slip, or that the translators whose names you want to associate with your projects are going to be reluctant to do it just because it's not worth their while compared to other work they could maybe get.
I think Pam wants to respond to you, and it's worth noting that a lot of the books that are coming out are from very reputable, respected, important translators, such as Pam Carmel, who is going to talk right now.
I have a long set of credentials as a literary translator, years and years of doing what would be on the opposite end of the spectrum of genre fiction, serious, obscure, and poetry. Love it, continue to do it. But I had to audition against some very well-established translators, and while you may not know my name, translators do, at least in a certain circle. The joy of getting paid at all with very fair royalties is terrific. But there's the other side of it too. Even though it's considered genre fiction, they are not picking grocery store literature. They're picking well-written genre fiction. I discovered this. I mean, I wasn't quite sure either in the beginning whether I really wanted to devote. It was a trilogy. So what did I want to get involved in? 3 books about zombies. That's what it is. Bestseller in Spain. But as I got into the work and realized just how sincere and good this writer is, I thought, well, this is worth it, and I'm getting paid. The other part of that is that as a result of having that bit of support, I'm also doing 2 other projects that won't be paid ever, poetry and obscure fiction, that I might not have been able to afford to do. And so I really feel like Amazon is helping me continue what I like to do. But there's another thing to that. It's there are people on the Amazon blog for this book who say, I've never read a translation. And they say, I read this book because I'm interested in Spain, not zombies. So I think it has increased a readership for any kind of translated literature that might translate into reading my obscure but interesting fiction that somebody's going to publish and not pay me a dime. So I'm not sure that any of these questions are really apt.
Do you want a hand behind you?
Yeah, I'll just chime in to talk very briefly about an Amazon Crossing project that I'm currently translating for an author who is a bestseller in Germany. Yes, and we hope he's going to follow on in the Amazon Crossing edition. He's got a long back catalogue as well, so I look forward to getting my teeth into it. Now, my author is the brother and brother-in-law of master carpenters. And Germany has a strange trade union structure where the status of being a master craftsman is very much more recognized than it is, for instance, in Britain. But he has commented that both of those guys earn more in any given year than he does. I mean, yeah, he gets to travel a little bit more and he is master of his own time more. But if we're drawing comparisons there, I mean, I don't think that I would give up translation to take up an industrial cleaning job because of the pay. I've been able to make that comparison and I'm doing fairly well. And I also confirm that I've been able to use the bestseller or the blockbuster or the genre work to cross-subsidize other projects, which I don't think I would get a publisher to touch if I were raising my prices for everybody across the board. Thank you.
Other questions? Oh, yeah.
So how do we find out which of the books that you're looking for translators for?
Well, good question. We do have cards here that I can distribute after the panel is over, but Amazon.com/translation, I believe, or it's translation.amazon.com. It's one of the two, but I can give you a card with the exact URL on it.
I think also we have a couple minutes. Any TLHub LAF questions? Anyone? If not, we're all going to be around. Oh, sorry, couldn't see.
For the TLHub, you're talking about the translation, the copyright of the translation being with the translator. But if you're uploading, do you upload the original text as well as the translation? And does that do you have to clear the copyright for that if it's in copyright?
Yes, it's the translator's responsibility to, or the person who's creating the project is entrusted with filling in the information and making sure that everything is clean from the copyright point of view. Something I didn't mention actually is that there in the version of TLHub that's being worked on now, there is a database that's available of public domain works that you can search for and select and import into the tool to experiment with the tool or to get a feel for it, or even to actually create translation projects with those public domain works. Yeah.
Last thoughts? Okay. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, way over here.
Hi, this is a question for everyone. According to your different experiences with the platforms that you are promoting now, what are the hopes for someone like me who is a Spanish speaker, like a native Spanish speaker, to translate into English? Has that become a bit easier with the different exchange possibilities that you offer, or what do you think?
Alexandra, you want to take that? You want to try and answer that?
Well, being a native speaker, I mean, this is one of the kind of controversies in the translation business. Can you translate into a language that's not your native language? And some, I mentioned translation funds earlier, some of them actually specify that they would only fund translations if they're done by native speakers. Now, I tend to personally disagree with this. I think anybody can translate from or into any language as long as they do it well. And so you just have to, if you, and also another issue is that there are increasingly more and more people who live in linguistic environments or countries which are other than those they were born in. So we all move much more. We're all, there are, Jill is someone who is a native speaker of English. She lives in Paris. I'm a native speaker of Czech. I live here in Britain, etc., etc. So I think, it's really up to you whether you will develop your skills. I don't know. I'm not probably answering your question. Can we help you in that? But I think really the ball's in your court there.
Outside of I would say that outside of the theoretical framework of that, something like TLHub is advantageous to you because then you do have a community that can be, I don't know where you're based, but say you're based in Spain, or let's pretend you're based in Spain, but you want to translate into English, you may not have a community there of people who can help mentor or give you proper feedback, but when you can do it online, then you can move that into a realm in which that you do get to learn the sort of weird grammatical quirks of English or things that you might not pick up on not being around it every single day. So I think there is something to that, to some technology that will boost the theoretical part of that.
Just very briefly, because it is about the point that's just been made. Thank you for that question that you just asked. It's a question that I've asked at previous translation events. We need to remember that, as was pointed out in one of the answers, people have very different language backgrounds that don't tend to fit the first language, second language, native language model. People are multilingual. And also there are a number of authors who have written in a language that they'd acquired late in childhood or even in adulthood. So if people do that in creative writing, we must remember that we can do that in translation, since translation is a creative process. And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to all of you for being on the panel. If you stick around, there is a lunchtime event that's a 4D, I forget what the name of it is now, I don't have that thing. Word keys. It's a 4D translation game. You meet right here, like right now. There's someone waving over there. Yes, and there's Rosalind right there. You can see her. She's tall and wearing blue. But she's going to be the one that kind of organizes and runs it. So if you're interested in this lunchtime networking fun time game, stick around and do that. Thanks to all of you for being on the panel, and thanks to everyone for coming and to everyone setting this up.